So I was at a Lifeway conference for women who lead other women. And it was early on in the day. We had just, we were standing in those lines, where you register, and it was a pretty long line. And, I was assuming we get what we normally get, which is just booklets and pens and maybe some paper. But as we're standing in this line, there is news traveling from the front of the line. It's traveling back. And here's what we're hearing, me and my friends. Bags. They've got bags. They've got bags? What? They've got bags? They've got bags. And so we didn't realize it at the time that we needed a bag so badly until we heard that bags were available. And suddenly, it became all the rage. And they were bags like this. Aren't they cute? Super cute. And so the thing about these bags, though, do you see this one? They're different. Right? So this pattern right here was different. What looked to me like on almost every bag, it seemed as though there was at least 100 different patterns. So there was a bunch of these bags floating around. And as I got up to the front of the line, this is actually the bag that I got, I became extremely helpful, really selfless as I came up to the front and the Lifeway worker was handing bags out. I began handing them out too. So it would come to me and I'd be like, I don't like that one. Here you go. And I just kept passing them back until I found the bag of my dreams, which is this. And so as I walked away, my friends were like, how in the world did you get that bag? I was like, I have no idea. I don't know. Just luck, I guess. Now, here's the thing. You would think once we received our bags, which we all toted around, that we would sort of come to grips with the lot that was apportioned to us. But I'm telling you, in every session over that 2 days, women who lead other women that should have a measure of maturity could not stop talking about bags and who got what design. Women were trading them. Women were scoping bags out. I was, and I had a good bag, but I'd sit down, Priscilla Shire's speaking, and I'm like, how'd she get that bag? Like, I wouldn't have given that one up. I like that one. And women are talking to one another about these bags. Now, here's what I believe to be true. We are by nature comparers, right? Don't we do this? We compare not only bags, but we compare husbands, right? We compare clothing. We compare our weight. We compare our accomplishments. We compare our children. We are, by human nature, people who will look at what we have and look at what other people have and do this comparison thing, right? Now, here's what I fear for us as we move into suffering, and that is this, that we start to become people who compare our suffering. And normally what it sounds like is this, well, surely in my small group, I can't even tell what my suffering has been because it's nothing like her suffering. So I've just sort of got to keep quiet about mine because it's not that big of a deal and I really just need to go over it. Or we say, compared to what's going on in the world, the suffering that's happened, mine is so small that I shouldn't even be mentioning it. Now, the problem with that is that even though our suffering could be in comparison to somebody else, bigger or smaller, it affects us and it affects our relationship with God. So we discredit it, but yet it sticks with us and our relationship with God. And so what we want to do here first is to define suffering, so we're all on the same page. And this is what suffering is defined as: feeling pain or distress. Have you ever felt pain or distress? And if you have suffered. Now, if you've come into the world, in whatever way, through your mother's birth canal, through like a surgeon opening your mother's stomach out. Some way you came out of your mom and into the world. And as you did, you came out crying. And you came out crying because that thing was traumatic. And you came out crying because you suffered. So if you are on this planet, you have experienced pain and distress. We have all suffered. And that suffering that we have experienced is personal suffering, is as unique to us as our fingerprint is. That means how we're wired mixes with our past and our present and our future, our personality, how we view the world. All of our suffering is completely unique to us. Now, as we look at suffering in this session, it's gonna be really easy to think about your friend who's sitting beside you. Now, what I mean by that is like what she needs to hear about her suffering, or man, I wish my husband could hear this. He needs to hear this about his suffering. We're going to put that aside. We're not going to compare our suffering. We're going to look directly at our suffering, put everyone else's away, and that takes some bravery on our part to dive into our own story, to claim our suffering, the pain and distress that we have felt, and to take a look at it. So I keep thinking this over this last 48 hours deeply. I can articulate really poorly. I can mess this up. I can say the wrong thing. I can confuse you guys. I could do a really bad job. Or I could articulate clearly and do a good job. It's not about my ability to communicate, nor is it about your ability to hear and perceive and understand. It is about God coming and speaking to us through his word. And for that to happen, I just feel such a need to ask him to help us on this particular session. So I'm gonna ask for that now. So God, we need you. I need you. The women listening need you as we hear your word. We need bravery to think about our own stories, to think about the effect it's had on us. So I'm asking you, God, to give that to us in bucketfuls, like your kindness and your mercy and eyesight and ears to hear, and that we would be listeners of truth. And so, God, I'm just gonna trust and believe you will do that for us. And so I pray this in the name of Jesus, amen. So when you guys hear or see this word, drama, what do you think of? I think of girl drama immediately. And that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And is not girl drama the worst? Like, is it just not the worst? And it's awful. Now, here's what I think. Girl drama comes from women, and I think it comes from women because by nature, I think we tend to be feelers. Not all of us, not all the time, not over everything, but in general, we're feelers. And where there are big feelings and lots of emotions, there tends to be lots of drama. Now, we find Job in the middle of the book, right here in this section, through chapter 4 and chapter 31, we find lots of drama. And I believe that's because emotions were running high. So that gave fertile soil for drama to happen. And boy, did it happen. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at really quickly, we're just gonna orient ourselves in the book of Job and make some progress through and meet some new friends in this session. So here we have Job. This is our friend Job. And in chapter 1 and 2, we have gone over this. So you guys know what has happened in chapter 1 and chapter 2. Job loses everything. It is loss. That's what marks chapter 1 and chapter 2. When he gets to the bottom of chapter 2, after all of his loss, so he's lost every bit of his possessions, all of his children, we get to chapter 2, he loses his health. Then at the bottom of chapter 2, we see that friends show up. And they just nail it. Like when they first get there, they see Job from a distance, and Job is in such a bad state that from a distance, the three friends tear their clothes, weep, wail, mourn, sprinkle ash on them. And that is, my friends, how you know when life is going very poorly. When your friends see you at a distance and start tearing their clothes and weeping and wailing, you know things have not gone well for you. And that is what they did for Job. And they sat with Job at the end of chapter 2 for 7 full days in silence. They just sat with him. They grieved with him. They were there with him. Like they were at such a strong start. Now, what happens at the end of chapter 2, after the silence, we move to chapter 3, where when Job opens his mouth, we see what comes out is a lament. So that means he was deeply, darkly depressed. No longer was he worshiping. Now he's saying, I regret the day I was born. Now, in his regret of the day he was born, something happens. He gets to the end of that chapter of deeply mourning his loss. We see his 3 friends, Elihu, Bildad, and Zophar. We see his 3 friends show up on the scene. And here they are. This is, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And they show up, and they've sat with Job in silence, as they should have, for seven days. Job opens his mouth. When he opens his mouth to speak, it's not pretty, right? It's not pretty at all. And the reason I think there's such a distinction between chapter 1 and 2 of Job worshiping, and then we get to 3, like what in the world happened, we have to remember this, that probably from the last time that we heard Job correct his wife in chapter 2 and say, listen, woman, we don't talk like that in this house. When she's like, go ahead and just curse God and die. Just roll over and die, Job, because it's just all downhill from here. And he's like, woman, keep your mouth shut. We don't talk like that about God in this house. We will take the good and the bad. We'll take it both. By the time Job says those words, and by the time we hear him in chapter 3, probably, there's no guarantee, but probably weeks, if not over a month, has gone by. And that means that Job has sat with boils, with losing his children, with no money, week after week after week. And God doesn't show up. Now, we'll remember what was in Job's God box. He mostly thought God was a God of justice. So I can imagine in those early days and weeks, he's thinking, God's gonna realize he made a mistake. He's gonna realize he made a mistake, and he's gonna right this, he's gonna fix it. But by the time we get to chapter 3, all that hope is gone. And so he lets his friends hear it, he lets God hear it, and our first friend, Eliphaz, wasn't having what Job had to say. And so there begins this argument between these 3 friends and our friend Job. Now, this argument goes for 28 chapters, and a lot of it sounds the same, and here's what it is. So they step up, and the friends say, Job, just admit your sin. So the 3 friends had the same God box, very similar to Job, where justice took up most of their God box. And so because justice took up most of their God box, they're like, there's no way that you haven't done something, Job. If you would just tell, Job, just tell us. If you tell us, then God's gonna right this. All you have to do is confess and admit. And Job is over here and says, that's offensive. You guys know me. You know how I live. You've watched my life. I have not done anything. And the friends are like, well, we've heard of a guy. We're not gonna name any names, but he was like a little fleshy, like he had a little bit of flab on his face and a little bit of a belly. And that was because he was rich. But then this one day, this thing happened where he lost everything, including his kids. Imagine that. And now he walks around, his tree will not bear fruit, he has no place to live, and Job's like, I know you're talking about me. I'm not an idiot. I'm in mourning, but I'm not an idiot. You guys are horrible comforters. And on this argument went. Friends saying, admit your sin, Job. And Job saying, I am innocent. I am innocent. And we watch this go on and on and on. Now, we end with Job in chapter 31, like we talked in the last session. He ends on listing out all his good behaviors that he has done and why he does not deserve this suffering. And then in chapter 32 arrives Elihu. Now, Elihu is a new friend with a new perspective. He is a new friend with a new perspective. Elihu's like, hold up, wait a second. I am so tired of you guys. Like, I am tired of this arguing. And I am young, so I have been quiet. But now Job is done talking, and it looked like Job basically had won the argument. The three friends were silenced because Job's basically like, listen, you're saying I sin, but just look around the world. Like, bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. Just look around. And the friends are like, okay, yeah, you sort of got a point. Like, we see where you're going. So Job had won the argument at this point, and Elihu was angry. Now, the first reason Elihu was angry was because Job justified himself rather than God. He justified himself rather than God. And the second reason Elihu was angry was because the three friends couldn't refute Job, yet they still condemned him. They still sat in judgment of him. And Elihu says, Job, stop justifying yourself, and friends, stop condemning Job when you cannot refute him. Now, not all scholars believe, actually, many scholars do not believe that we should even listen to Elihu. Now, in your workbook is a longer list. I'm going to give you two reasons. I do believe we should listen to Elihu. I deeply believe that. And I'm going to give you two reasons, and here's the first one. Elihu's correction of Job was God's correction of Job. Elihu's correction of Job was God's correction of Job. So let's look at Elihu's correction of Job. But Elihu became very angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God. Okay, now let's look at what God's correction of Job was. This is what God had to say to Job. Would you, Job, discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? It is extremely similar. It is, Job was so clinging to his own righteousness that he was willing to make him being right, God, in essence, being wrong. And Elihu says, that is no way to think or to talk about God. Now, the second reason is Elihu is not corrected by God at the end of the book, unlike Job, who repents, and unlike the three friends who repent as well. Let's listen to what God had to say. After the Lord had said these things to Job, so God shows up, speaks to Job, Job repents. He says to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, Bildad and Zophar, because you have not spoken the truth about me like my servant Job has. Now, the truth that Job spoke about God was, God is not punishing me for my sin. I don't know why it is, but it's not because I've sinned. And God is saying, you can't just blame this and say, you know me and you have me in a box, three friends, and you know exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. You're wrong. You did not have the right answer. So, we see that is where we end up with Eliphaz and what God had to say. Now, what Eliphaz points out, he's got two beliefs that he says, listen, I've been listening a long time to you, Job, and I've got two major problems with you and your belief system, what you believe to be true. The first one, Elihu points out Job's belief that God is silent. Now, this is what Eliphaz is saying to Job. Okay, Job, why do you complain to him that he, God, responds to no one's words? For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceive it. Or, so he goes on to talk about God could come in dreams and visions and speak to you, or Someone may be chastened on a bed of pain. Yes, he is directly speaking about Job and Job being chastened on a bed of pain, with constant distress in their bones, so that their body finds food repulsive and their soul loathes the choicest meal. Their flesh wastes away to nothing, and their bones, once hidden, now stick out. I remember the first time reading this verse, and I didn't know what it was about this verse that just leapt off the pages. And I didn't know exactly what it was or why it was leaping off like this to me. But it spoke to me. And one thing that it is saying, that Elihu is saying, is God is not silent. God speaks through suffering. So Elihu is saying, God is not silent. You're wrong, Job. Whether you're perceiving him to speak or not, he's speaking. He's always speaking. And Elihu says, one way that he speaks, we don't like this. One way he speaks is through suffering. Now let's look back to this verse, okay? Their flesh waste away to nothing, and their bones, once hidden, now stick out. Okay, we're gonna hang here for a few minutes. Now, the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna look at what does this mean physically? We're gonna look at what does this mean for Job, because as Elihu is talking to him, there is a physical meaning and there's a spiritual meaning. So the physical meaning was this. Think about Job sitting on his ash heap, boils covering him from head to toe, like they're oozing, probably in his mouth. I don't know why that would be an area they weren't. And as he sat on the ash heap, and he mourned physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in every way, he was in pain. Like, I imagine it says, he could not eat from depression, possibly sores in his mouth. And that made his flesh that was once thick, and we know it was thick because his friends tell us it was thick. Thanks, guys. Thanks for pointing that out. It once was thick, but now, through suffering, it has thinned. And once through the starving of his physical body, his flesh wastes away. Now, the bones once hidden now stick out. His rib cage that we couldn't see before because of ease and comfort now protrude out of him. Does that make sense? His bones, once hidden, now stick out. So Elihu says, physically, you end up suffering and you're exposing all your bones in your body. Through suffering, that's what it does. And he's implying comfort and ease put physical flesh on our bones. When we're comfortable physically and we're at ease, some of us have more comfort than others. It puts flesh on our bones. But then suffering comes and you're starved and then your flesh shrinks. So now what he's gonna move to is, okay, so that's what it is physically. Now let's look at what does that mean spiritually? Suffering starves Job's inward self, so his soul, his inward man, until it exposes the bare bones of Job's belief. Suffering, the same way that it did physically, internally, it starved his inward self until it exposed Job's belief system. Now, what this did was, as Job was on the ash heap, we're gonna now picture this as a spiritual Job, on the inside, the inner man of Job. So as his ease and comfort was taken away, his inward soul starved. He did not have that comfort to lean on. And as his inward soul starved, bones start popping out. And one bone was self-righteousness popped on out. What once was hidden now sticks out. Job couldn't see that self-righteousness until suffering came and starved his flesh, but now it's protruding out of him. He finds himself righteous and more righteous than God. he also has a bone that sticks out that believes that God should answer him. There is like a rib bone of entitlement that just pops right out of him as his inner self starves. I deserve an answer from you, God. I am entitled to know why this has happened. If he had not suffered, he would not have ever known that existed. But all of Job's bones that popped out were not all ugly. He had beautiful bones that popped out of him where he fell to his face and worshiped. In the middle of the book, there would be these times that he would come, and out of nowhere, he'd be ranting about God and his friends, and he'd say something like, I know I'm gonna see God with my own eyes. I, not another. I have faith, a bone that sticks out. I have faith to believe God's gonna do something. I believe it. And that bone just jutted out of him, and it was a beautiful bone of faith and belief and who God was. Not all bones are ugly, but all suffering exposes what once was hidden. Suffering is exposing, and it does what comfort will never be able to do. In the early days of grieving our daughter's death, I remember checking off the days, like we've lived through one more day, because when you're grieving, some of you know this, you wake up in the morning and you have to wake back up into the reality. I don't know how to really explain it besides you're sleeping, and it's almost as if you forget as you sleep, and then you open your eyes, but kind of before you're really awake, you get this sense that something terrible has gone on, but you can't quite remember yet in that split first second of what it is. And in that second, when it floods back to you, it's like you relive it all over again. Every morning, waking up to that. And so I remember thinking, okay, like it's been a week. We've lived, we've made through it. Okay, it's been 2 weeks, we're still here. Okay, like maybe we can get through the next week. Like I'm counting Fridays. She passed away on a Friday. I'd always count the first of the month. She passed away on the first of the month. Let's just get to the next month. And it was on month 4 that Adeline, my 13-year-old daughter, began having really strange symptoms. And my friend, who's a nurse practitioner, had said, immediately we need to go to CVS and get a blood sugar tester. And so we did. It was late at night, and we had tested, woke her up, tested it, and on the meter it just said H for high. And so we knew at that point it was not good news. And so we went to the ER, they tested her blood, it just said H for high. And so they took her blood, sent it to the lab, and when it came back, her blood sugar, which should have been between about 70 and 120, was 800. We knew at that second that she had type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disorder. And I will never forget, it was her and I in the emergency room, late at night, probably 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., and the news coming back finally, and she looked at me and said, Mom, do I have diabetes? And I said, yes, babe, you have type 1 diabetes. And her shoulders slumped, and she was so sad. We didn't know how it was gonna affect our lives, but we knew something radical was about ready to change in our lives. And it was at that moment, sitting there in those hours, it was if God, it felt like, pulled the light and everything went dark. I had seen his light for years now. I had felt him so close. Even in the darkest hours of suffering, I felt as if I could see. But now, it felt as if everything was pitch black. And I mean, wave your hand in front of your face and you see nothing. And what started to happen in those moments is I started thinking and asking God, are you mad at me? Because every time I have to walk into my child's room while she's sleeping to check her blood sugar, type 1 diabetics can die of blood sugar drops, and so we had to check her in the middle of the night as she's getting adjusted. And I walk in there with fear poking out, disbelief and not trust in God poking out of me, and saying, okay, God, do I have to walk in and find another child, our last child, our only child, gone in her bed from sleeping? Like, are you punishing me? Have I done something as a mother that you are now punishing my child for my sins? Why are you doing this to me? And why are you doing this to my family? Months of suffering, like Job, began to expose the bare bones of my belief system, something that comfort could never do. And I saw ugly bones of doubt, of believing God's goodness, feeling as if he may be against me. And I saw some beautiful bones that I didn't know existed of faith and steadfastness, and they just sort of existed together in this ironic bone jutting out of myself. Now the question is, as we walk through life, as I walk through my life, as Job walked through his, and these bones start protruding, what do we do? Now Elihu has a suggestion for us. What do we do when we start seeing these bones stick out? Elihu says, an appropriate response to suffering is not, I am innocent. Instead, he urges Job to ask, teach me, Lord, what I cannot see. Teach me what I cannot see. As the hours and days and weeks of suffering will starve your inward soul until there's just bones popping out. Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about, where something has happened. It doesn't have to be the loss of a child. It doesn't have to be what Job experienced, but it's been a betrayal by a friend or a husband. It's been a loss of a job. It's been no child, and you long for a child, like to the depth of your soul, and month after month after month, there's nothing but emptiness, and it grieves you. And as those months go on, there's a starving that happens of the inward soul. And as the inward soul starves, bones start sticking out, some pretty and some ugly. And as they do that, here's what we want to do. This is what we want to do. As we see them, we don't want to think they're true. We want to think they're false. And here's what we do. Suffering doesn't create true or false beliefs about God. Suffering uncovers them. Suffering, the starving of the inward man, does not create true or false beliefs about God. Suffering uncovers them. Let's think about this for a second. So what's happening as our bones start to protrude out, it's not creating bones. It's exposing what's already been there that you cannot see. It uncovers. Suffering uncovers. It does not create. What we want to do is say, well, if my husband would, or if God would just, then I wouldn't say that or do that. I wouldn't feel like this. This is because of that. And what Elihu says through the word of God is, that's not true. Suffering only points to, exposes what is true about the inside of us. And I remember having these bones protrude out of me and going, okay, God, teach me what I cannot see. Like, would you expose on the inside of me the things that comfort could never afford me? Now that I sit in suffering, now teach me. And I believe from God, so clearly sensed what I should do. Now, I didn't feel it. I wasn't like, oh, let me do this, I just can't wait. I had a sense of this is the only thing that will make me remain sane. And so as my family would go to bed at night, both early birds, and I'm a late night person, I would sit in my living room and I'd open his word and I would say it out loud. Teach me, Lord, what I cannot see. I would say it out loud so that if I'm asking him to teach me, then I need to be listening. And one way for me to do this is as I speak his word out loud, I'm asking him to speak. Well, I'm gonna speak his word out loud and let those words wrap back around and hit my own eardrums. He is speaking. He will teach. It's right here. This is our hope. It is our sanity when all goes wrong, when our bones are protruding out, when life feels dark and dim. This is what we get to say, teach me what I cannot see, expose the bones, and I will listen. I will put my ear to your word and listen to what you say about who you are and who I am because of that. We want to be women who are brave enough, and it does take bravery, to look down and to see these bones that jut out of us. To say, okay, God, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand why you're letting my inward woman be starved so much that my bones are jutting out. But now that I find myself here with ribs and collarbones and hip bones jutting out, now that I find myself here, I'm gonna ask you, teach me what I cannot see. And then, Lord, I will listen. Through your word, I will listen to what you have to say. We want to be that type of woman. And so, God, for that to happen, you've got to make us brave. Who wants to see these ugly things sticking out of us? I only want to look at the pretty. That's all I want to see. But God, as you allow comfort to be stripped from us, ease and luxury to be stripped, and as we starve on the inside through all kinds of troubles, would you be kind and gracious enough to expose what already exists on the inside of us? And then would you make us women who are brave enough to look down and examine it as you teach us what's there? And then would you speak through your word? Would you speak through the community that's around us? Would there be hope and encouragement and life? Would we see what's coming in the days to come ahead with you forever as we go through this light and momentary trouble as it exposes and does what you have purposed it to do in us? And so, God, these are the things I ask for us, and I believe you will answer. So give us eyes to see and ears to hear you. We love you, and I pray this in Christ. Amen.